I've slept with my brother-in-law many times. How do I face my sister? I never imagined I would find myself in such a complicated and messy situation. My life was pretty straightforward until a few months ago when everything changed. My sister Sarah had been happily married to her husband Mark for a few years now. They seemed like the perfect couple, always laughing and enjoying each other's company. I admired their relationship and hoped to find a love like theirs someday. But then something unexpected happened. It was a warm summer evening when Mark and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. Sarah had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day at work. Mark and I were chatting and joking around as we often did. But this time there was a different energy between us, a spark that I had never noticed before. As we talked, Mark's hand accidentally brushed against mine, sending a shiver down my spine. Our eyes locked. And at that moment, I knew something had shifted. Before I could process what was happening, Mark leaned in and kissed me. It was a kiss filled with passion and urgency, as if he had been holding back for a long time. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should have pushed him away, but I couldn't. The desire that coursed through my body was too strong to resist. We ended up in a tangled mess of limbs, our bodies intertwined as we explored each other in ways I had never experienced before. Afterward, as we lay there catching our breath, the guilt began to seep in. What had I done? How could I betray my sister like this? Mark assured me that it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness that wouldn't happen again, but deep down I knew that was a lie. In the weeks that followed, Mark and I found ourselves drawn to each other like magnets. Every stolen glance, every accidental touch ignited the fire within us. We started finding excuses to be alone together, sneaking off to secret rendezvous whenever we could. Each time we were together, the passion between us grew more intense. Mark's touch set my skin ablaze, and his kisses made me forget about the world outside. But as soon as the heat of the moment passed, the guilt would come crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I couldn't look my sister in the eye anymore. Every time I saw her, I was reminded of the betrayal I was committing. I tried to convince myself that it was just a physical attraction, that it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew that was a lie too. Mark started to confess his feelings for me, telling me that he had always been drawn to me. He said that he loved Sarah, but he couldn't deny the connection he felt with me. His words only added to my confusion and turmoil. I was torn between my desire for Mark and my loyalty to my sister. I knew that what we were doing was wrong on so many levels, but every time I tried to end things, to walk away from the temptation, I found myself pulled back in, unable to resist the magnetic force between us. As the weeks turned into months, the weight of the secret began to take its toll on me. I was constantly on edge, afraid that Sarah would somehow discover the truth. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the guilt that consumed me. I knew that I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to give. But how could I possibly confess to my sister that I had been sleeping with her husband? How could I shatter the trust and love that we had always shared? Little did I know, the decision would soon be taken out of my hands. A series of events were about to unfold that would force me to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The temptation had led me down a dangerous path, and now I had to face the consequences of my actions. As the weeks turned into months, Mark and I found ourselves consumed by our illicit affair. Every stolen moment together was filled with a heady mix of passion and guilt, a dangerous cocktail that kept us coming back for more. We started taking more risks, finding creative ways to sneak off together. Late-night phone calls, secret meetings in out-of-the-way places, and even a weekend getaway under the guise of a work trip. Each encounter only fueled the fire between us, making it harder and harder to resist the temptation. But with every passionate embrace, every whispered promise, the weight of my betrayal grew heavier. I could see the love and trust in Sarah's eyes when she looked at me, and it tore me apart inside. How could I continue to deceive her like this? How could I live with myself, knowing the pain I would cause her if she ever found out? Mark sensed my growing unease and tried to reassure me. He told me that what we had was special, that it was worth fighting for. He promised that he would find a way for us to be together, that he would leave Sarah and start a new life with me. But even as his words filled me with a desperate hope, I knew deep down that it was a fantasy. Mark was never going to leave Sarah, not really. He was too comfortable in his life, too afraid of the consequences, and I couldn't bear the thought of destroying my sister's happiness for my own selfish desires. I tried to end things with Mark, to put a stop to the madness before it was too late, but every time I summoned the courage to walk away, he would pull me back in with his words, his touch, his promises of a future that could never be. We started getting careless, letting our guard down in moments of passion. One evening, Sarah almost caught us in the act. We were in the living room, lost in each other's arms, when we heard her key in the door. We sprang apart just in time, but the close call left me shaken and terrified. I couldn't shake the feeling that our luck was running out, that it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. The tension between Mark and me was palpable, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Sarah started to notice the changes in me, the way I withdrew from her and avoided her gaze. She asked me if everything was okay, if there was something bothering me. I lied through my teeth, telling her that I was just stressed with work, that I had a lot on my mind, but the guilt was eating me alive. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror anymore, couldn't bear the sight of the person I had become. I was a liar, a cheater, a betrayer of the worst kind. I started having panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, my heart racing and my mind reeling with the fear of discovery. I knew that I couldn't keep living like this, that something had to give. But even as I struggled with the weight of my actions, I couldn't seem to stay away from Mark. The pull between us was too strong, too all-consuming. We were like two stars caught in each other's orbit, destined to collide and burn out in a spectacular explosion of passion and pain. Little did I know, the explosion was closer than I ever could have imagined. A shocking revelation was about to shatter the fragile web of lies and deceit that we had woven, leaving us all reeling in its wake. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of my guilt became almost unbearable. Every time I saw Sarah's smiling face, heard her laughter, or felt her warm embrace, I felt like the worst person in the world. How could I continue to betray her trust like this? How could I look her in the eye, knowing the terrible secret I was keeping? I tried to distance myself from Mark, to put an end to our illicit affair. I told him that we couldn't keep doing this, that it was tearing me apart inside. But every time I tried to walk away, he would pull me back in with his words, his touch, his promises of a love that could never be. I could see the toll that our secret was taking on him too. He was constantly on edge, jumpy and nervous whenever Sarah was around. He started drinking more, staying out late at night and making excuses for his absences. One evening, after a particularly intense encounter with Mark, I found myself alone in my room, sobbing uncontrollably. The guilt and shame were overwhelming, crushing me under their weight. I felt like I was suffocating, like I couldn't breathe. I knew that I needed to confess, to come clean to Sarah and beg for her forgiveness. But every time I tried to summon the courage, I would falter, too afraid of the consequences, too afraid of losing everything I held dear. Mark sensed my turmoil and tried to comfort me. He told me that he loved me, that he would do anything to protect me. But his words only made me feel worse. How could he claim to love me when he was betraying his own wife? How could he expect me to trust him when he was capable of such deceit? I started having nightmares, terrible visions of Sarah finding out the truth. In my dreams, she would scream and cry, her face contorted with pain and rage. She would call me a monster, a betrayer, a selfish bitch who had ruined her life. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding and my mind reeling. I knew that I couldn't keep living like this, that something had to give. But I was too afraid to face the truth, too afraid to shatter the fragile illusion of normalcy that we had created. One night, after a particularly vivid nightmare, I found myself in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall. Sarah walked in and found me there, tears streaming down my face. She asked me what was wrong, her voice filled with concern and love. For a moment, I considered telling her everything, pouring out my heart and begging for her forgiveness. But as I opened my mouth to speak, Mark walked in, his eyes wide with fear and guilt. He quickly made an excuse, saying that he had forgotten something in the car. But I could see the panic in his eyes, the desperate plea for me to keep quiet. And in that moment, I realized the true depth of his betrayal. He wasn't just betraying Sarah, he was betraying me too. He was willing to let me bear the burden of our secret, to let me suffer in silence while he continued to live his life as if nothing had happened. I felt a wave of anger and disgust wash over me, a burning rage that threatened to consume me. I knew that I had to confront him, to demand the truth and put an end to this madness once and for all. But as I opened my mouth to speak, a sudden realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Mark's past, the secrets he had kept hidden for so long, were about to come to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Sarah kept shooting me concerned glances, her eyes filled with worry and suspicion. I knew that she could sense that something was wrong, that the cracks in my facade were starting to show. I tried to act normal, to go about my day as if nothing had changed. But every time I saw Mark, every time our eyes met across the room, I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. How could he continue to lie to Sarah, to me, to everyone? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I cornered Mark in the kitchen, my hands shaking with rage and fear. I demanded that he tell me the truth, that he come clean about everything he had been hiding. At first, he tried to deny it, to play dumb and act like he had no idea what I was talking about. But as I pressed him, as I refused to back down, he finally broke. With tears in his eyes, he confessed to a shocking secret from his past. He had been married before to a woman named Emily. They had been young and in love, but their marriage had been troubled from the start. Emily had suffered from depression and anxiety, and Mark had struggled to support her. They had fought constantly, their arguments turning violent and abusive. And then one day, Emily had disappeared. Mark had reported her missing, but the police had never found any trace of her. He had been the prime suspect, but there was never enough evidence to charge him with a crime. He had moved on with his life, burying his past and trying to forget the pain and guilt that haunted him. But now, with our affair threatening to unravel everything, the truth was finally coming to light. I was stunned, my mind reeling with the revelation. How could Mark have kept something like this from me, from Sarah? How could he have lied to us for so long? Sarah walked in on us then, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. She demanded to know what was going on, why Mark and I were arguing in the kitchen. I knew that I had to come clean, that I couldn't keep lying to her any longer. With a heavy heart, I told her everything, pouring out the truth about our affair and Mark's hidden past. Sarah was devastated, her face crumpling with pain and betrayal. She couldn't believe that her own sister and her husband had been lying to her for so long, that they had been carrying on an affair behind her back. Mark tried to intervene, to explain himself and beg for forgiveness, but Sarah wasn't having it. She lashed out at him, screaming and crying, her pain and anger boiling over. I watched in horror as their marriage unraveled before my eyes, as the trust and love that they had built together shattered into a million pieces. I knew that I had played a part in this, that I was just as guilty as Mark. But as I watched Sarah's heart break, as I saw the pain and betrayal in her eyes, I knew that I had to make a choice. I had to come clean, to tell the whole truth and face the consequences of my actions. I had to do whatever it took to make things right, to heal the wounds that I had helped to create. But as I opened my mouth to speak, As I prepared to bare my soul and beg for forgiveness, I realized that the path forward was not going to be easy. The reckoning was just beginning, and the road to redemption would be long and painful. Part 5: The Reckoning. In the aftermath of the revelation, the silence that fell over the house was deafening. Sarah had locked herself in her room, refusing to come out or speak to anyone. Mark had disappeared, leaving only a cryptic note behind. I was left alone, the weight of my guilt and shame pressing down on me like a physical force. I knew that I had to make things right, that I had to find a way to earn Sarah's forgiveness and rebuild the trust that I had shattered. I spent hours pacing the halls, trying to gather my thoughts and find the courage to face my sister. Finally, I knocked on her door, my heart pounding in my chest. When she opened the door, her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and pain, her voice barely above a whisper as she asked me why I had done this to her. I broke down then, the tears streaming down my face as I poured out my heart to her. I told her everything, from the first moment of temptation to the final devastating revelation. I begged her to forgive me, to give me a chance to make things right. At first, Sarah was silent, her face a mask of pain and betrayal. But as I spoke, as I laid bare the truth of my actions and the depth of my remorse, something shifted in her eyes. She reached out and took my hand, her voice shaking with emotion as she told me that she forgave me. She said that she knew how easy it was to make mistakes, to get caught up in the heat of the moment and lose sight of what was truly important. We cried together then, holding each other tight as we mourned the loss of the trust and love that we had once shared. But even in the midst of our pain, there was a glimmer of hope, a sense that we could find a way to move forward together. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, Sarah and I began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the pain and anger would resurface, threatening to tear us apart once more. But we refused to give up, to let the mistakes of the past define our future. We talked for hours, sharing our fears and hopes, our dreams and desires. We learned to forgive each other, and more importantly, to forgive ourselves. As for Mark, he eventually returned, his eyes haunted by the weight of his own guilt and shame. He knew that he had a long road ahead of him, that he would have to work hard to earn back Sarah's trust and prove that he was worthy of her love. But even in the midst of the pain and uncertainty, there was a sense of hope, a feeling that we could all find a way to heal and move forward together.